I became born again at 12 years old during the wildest spiritual revolution America had ever seen. From barefoot Jesus freaks to billion-dollar megachurches, cult tragedies to crystal healers, the 70s and 80s didn't just change music and fashion, they rewrote the soul of a generation. And I lived through all of it. Hey there, retrospective crew. Sentimental Cindy here, and today we're diving deep into the spiritual transformation that powered these decades and changed everything. We're talking about religious awakenings, church explosions, and movements that didn't just reshape a nation, they transformed my life forever. This era had it all. Barefoot hippies finding Jesus, televangelist empires, tragic cult disasters, and the rise of New Age healing. The ripple effects touch politics, pop culture, family dynamics, and personal faith in ways we're still feeling today. Plus, I'll reveal the shocking Hollywood connection to my childhood church you may just recognize. So grab a drink and get comfortable because we're exploring how 2 decades of spiritual chaos, beauty, and transformation didn't just save the world, they also saved me, a little girl who walked into a church and came out completely changed. Chapter 1. The spiritual vibe shift of the 70s. So here's what was going down. The wild 60s had just ended. Think civil rights marches, anti-war protests, hippie culture, sexual liberation, all of it. By the time the 70s rolled around, young people were like traditional institutions? Thanks, but no thanks. And yeah, that absolutely included churches. Mainstream church attendance started tanking as Sunday services felt stale and irrelevant. There was this growing hunger for something deeper, more personal, more real. That spiritual curiosity cracked open the door to a massive wave of alternative paths. Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism gained serious traction in the West. Yoga wasn't just about exercise, it was a spiritual practice. Meditation went mainstream as people desperately sought inner peace. Meanwhile, ancient traditions were being dusted off and reimagined. Modern paganism absolutely exploded, particularly among feminists and nature lovers. Groups like the Covenant of the Goddess and traditions like Dianic Wicca celebrated goddess worship, magic, and environmentalism. Spirituality was becoming deeply personal, political, and even playful. But this wasn't all incense and good vibes. The era also birthed some serious darker paths. Cult groups like Heaven's Gate had their twisted roots in this period of an intense spiritual searching. The dangerous side of belief emerged too. Movements like the Creativity Movement wrapped white supremacist hate in spiritual disguise. The verdict? The 1970s unleashed a spiritual revolution that changed everything. Faith exploded into something personal, mystical, cosmic, and countercultural, and in some cases, absolutely destructive. Chapter 2. The Jesus Revolution, a counterculture awakening. This movement wasn't just headlines for me, it was deeply personal. When my sister and I went to our local church as tweens and became born again, we became a part of something bigger than both of us. That moment gave me a peace and strength that shaped who I became, a calm, grounded woman of God who chooses trust over stress, belief over worry. Just when it seemed like young people were ditching religion entirely, though, something totally unexpected happened. Enter the Jesus movement. This spiritual explosion hit in the late 60s and early 70s, especially in Southern California. Pastor Chuck Smith of Calvary Chapel did something revolutionary. He opened his church doors to long-haired Jesus freaks without judgment and let them play rock music as worship. Figures like Greg Laurie, the pastor who founded Harvest Christian Fellowship, emerged from this movement. His journey from a broken home and aimless youth to prominent ministry, embodying the movement's power to reach people that traditional church had failed to connect with. It was wild, unfiltered, and exactly what so many were desperately searching for. If you've seen the 2023 movie, The Jesus Revolution, you know exactly what this era looked and felt like. The film, starring Kelsey Grammer as Chuck Smith, Jonathan Romy as Lonnie Frisbee, and Joel Courtney as Greg Laurie, brilliantly captures that unlikely convergence of hippie counterculture and evangelical Christianity, showing how real transformation can emerge from the most unexpected places. What made this period so compelling was its raw authenticity. It wasn't manufactured or marketed, but emerged organically from real spiritual hunger. Great movie, by the way. It's a must-see. The Jesus movement completely redefined what Christianity could look like. This wave also birthed contemporary Christian music, or CCM, with artists like Larry Norman and later Amy Grant, who was writing songs that sounded like radio hits but carried deeply spiritual lyrics. The charismatic movement gained serious momentum alongside this, bringing intense focus to spiritual gifts like speaking in tongues, healing, and prophecy. Pentecostal churches suddenly found themselves at the forefront of mainstream Christianity, proving that people crave the supernatural, miraculous elements of Christianity that traditional denominations often downplayed. Amy Grant was my favorite. My mom and I thoroughly enjoyed her show on Costa Mesa in the 80s. I think it's cool that she and Vince Gill will be celebrating 25 years of marriage this year. Out of this scene came groups like the 12 Tribes and movements like Jews for Jesus. But not everything was sunshine and sandals. The shepherding movement later drew major criticism for encouraging unhealthy control over members' lives. Still, for so many other people, the Jesus movement was a genuine lifeline. It showed that faith didn't have to be stiff or judgmental. It could be wild, raw, and completely redemptive. My family attended the same Methodist church until I was in my 20s. But this was no ordinary church. Dun 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 dun. It was the church where the final scene of The Graduate was filmed in 1967. Yep, that's right. That was my church. It also happened to be the church where my sister got married for the first time and where I met my best friend, who just happened to be the pastor's daughter. We were all friends, actually. But sometimes Jamie and I would get busted for passing notes during the church service. Oops. It's also directly across the street from my old high school. Behind the church is this big old beautiful tree, which you can see when you're sitting inside the church through the window. And it's where my family had taken photographs when I was younger, and in high school is where my drill team photos were taken. Ah, memories. Chapter 3. Evangelical power rises in the 80s. As the 70s faded and the 80s kicked off, the Jesus movement basically grew up and got seriously political. What started as a barefoot beachside revival transformed into this massive cultural and political powerhouse. With Ronald Reagan in the White House, evangelicals weren't just feeling the spirit anymore. They were organizing, voting, and showing up in serious force. Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority mobilized millions of believers into this potent voting bloc that completely reshaped American politics. Meanwhile, megachurches absolutely exploded across America. These weren't your cozy neighborhood chapels, mind you. We're talking stadium-sized complexes with professional light shows, indoor coffee shops, and pastors who became legitimate household names. Churches like Saddleback and Willow Creek turned Sunday into this polished, multimedia experience. Pastors like Rick Warren and Bill Hybels became celebrities in their own right. Though Hybels would later resign in 2018 after allegations of sexual misconduct, which unfortunately an independent investigation found credible. Christian media exploded right along with the spiritual awakening. TVN dominated the 80s, flooding living rooms with preaching, worship music, and the increasingly popular prosperity gospel. Christian families practically scheduled their lives around the 700 Club. I know my mom did. Who knew back then that Pat Robertson would live to 93? I guess daily prayer really is the fountain of youth. The church growth movement introduced straight-up corporate strategy into the ministry, using data, demographics, and seeker-sensitive services to attract the unchurched. All this growth came with growing paranoia about secular influence. Public schools became a particular flashpoint, triggering a massive wave of Christian families ditching public schools for homeschooling or Christian private schools. This era marked a completely new chapter of confidence and culture-shaping ambition for evangelicals. Faith wasn't just about what happened inside church walls anymore. It was about transforming the entire nation. Yet the seeds of future scandals were already being planted in the very institutions that seemed the most successful. Chapter 4: New Age, Spiritualism, and the Expanding Spectrum. While Christianity was going totally mainstream, other spiritual seekers were branching out in completely different directions. The same hunger for meaning that fueled the Jesus movement also stirred up this massive wave of curiosity about mysticism, the occult, and alternative healing. Then came the New Age movement, this massive spiritual buffet where literally everything was fair game. Astrology, chakra balancing, energy healing, reincarnation, crystals, tarot, numerology. It was all laid out on the same cosmic table. This was DIY spirituality at its finest. Build your own belief system. Follow your own inner truth. Alternative healing became a total cornerstone. Practices like Reiki, aromatherapy, acupuncture, and crystal therapy gained devoted followers seeking holistic balance. Ancient wisdom traditions got major modern makeovers too. The Kabbalah Center began drawing serious attention by making Jewish mysticism accessible to a broader, celebrity-filled audience. This era made one thing crystal clear. No pun intended. You didn't have to choose between faith and freedom. You could absolutely forge your own path. This spiritual openness was especially empowering for those who had felt completely alienated by traditional religious structures. It wasn't just a rebellion against organized religion, though. It was a complete renaissance of the human spirit, one crystal at a time. So did you ever try to balance your chakras or talk to your crystals back in the day? Let me know your wildest New Age experiences or even experiments in the comments. Chapter 5: Cults, Controversy, and the Dark Side. But let's be real, not every spiritual journey ended with peace, healing, or personal enlightenment. For all the vibrant moments and meaningful awakenings, this era also had a seriously sinister undercurrent, one filled with manipulation, exploitation, and outright tragedy. November 18, 1978 marked a turning point. Jonestown, Guyana became synonymous with the darkest possibilities of religious community when over 900 members of the People's Temple died in an orchestrated mass murder-suicide. This wasn't just a tragedy, though. It was a wake-up call that reverberated through every corner of religious and spiritual life. Then came Puram in the 80s, the sprawling commune in remote Oregon that looked like a spiritual paradise from the outside. What they got instead was stockpiled weapons, immigration fraud, and America's first bioterror attack when followers poisoned salad bars to swing a local election. So why did people fall for these movements? Most were genuinely searching for belonging, for healing, for answers in an increasingly chaotic world. They were drawn by promises of unconditional love, higher purpose, and spiritual transformation. The problem wasn't the seeking, it was what happened next. Control tactics crept in slowly, cutting off outside relationships, demanding absolute obedience, and draining bank accounts. These tragedies forced America to wrestle with uncomfortable questions. How do we balance religious freedom with protecting people from harm? And what makes a belief system cross the line into dangerous territory? And let's be honest, who among us hasn't watched a cult documentary and thought, how did they not see the red flags? I know I've thought that. Only to realize that's exactly what makes these stories so chilling. It could really happen to anyone, including a naive 12-year-old girl who thought she was simply going to church. But thankfully for me, the dark spiritual clouds parted, so to speak, and opened me up to the clarity of genuine love and believing. Chapter 6: Cultural Shockwaves. The spiritual explosion of the 70s and 80s sent shockwaves through American culture that nobody saw coming. But here's the paradox. While this spiritual awakening was transforming millions of lives, religious leaders were experiencing very public scandals. Major televangelists like Jim Bakker saw their empires collapse amid financial fraud and moral failures. Jimmy Swaggart's tearful "I have sinned" confession became a cultural moment that dominated headlines and water cooler conversations across America.
Talking at the water coolers.
Water coolers.
It's become water cooler gossip.
Yet, while religion faced credibility challenges, it was simultaneously shaping entertainment in unprecedented ways. Hollywood tapped into spiritual themes with blockbuster films like The Exorcist, The Omen, and Poltergeist. Movies that terrified audiences while exploring deep questions about good and evil. Television offered a different perspective with shows like Highway to Heaven, portraying angels walking among ordinary people. Even mainstream rock stars were wrestling with faith publicly. Bob Dylan's born-again Christian faith shocked the music world, while U2 infused their stadium anthems with spiritual searching and social justice themes. During this upheaval, Christians built an entirely separate cultural ecosystem. Contemporary Christian music exploded into a massive industry. Christian bookstores evolved into comprehensive lifestyle centers, offering everything from books and music to home decor and gifts. Christian schools and colleges multiplied rapidly, creating educational alternatives where families could integrate faith with learning. This parallel culture allowed believers to live, work, and play within distinctly faith-centered communities. The cultural impact was remarkable. From the sacred to the secular, from entertainment to education, the spiritual movements of this era left their mark on every aspect of American life. What's fascinating is how this era created both spiritual awakening and spiritual controversy, both religious renewal and religious skepticism, all happening simultaneously in the same cultural moment. Got a quick question for you. What's the wildest thing your parents banned due to spiritual concerns? Thriller albums? Dungeons and Dragons? Certain TV shows? Drop your stories in the comments. I know I'm not the only one with some seriously specific 80s spiritual restrictions. My parents banned me from watching Dallas, but I secretly watched it anyway. Sorry, Mom. I had to get my weekly dose of J.R. Ewing drama. Chapter 7. Legacy. Faded or thriving? Did these spiritual movements simply fade away with other cultural trends of the era like bell-bottoms and disco balls? Not even close. The spiritual awakening of the 70s and 80s didn't fade. It evolved and got woven into the fabric of how Americans do spirituality today. Take the Jesus movement. What started as hippies finding Jesus transformed into today's mainstream evangelical scene. Those non-denominational churches with their coffee bars, rock bands, and come as you are vibe are basically the grown-up version of those early Jesus people gatherings. And the New Age crowd? Well, they got a complete makeover. Crystal shops transformed into trendy wellness boutiques, astrology became slick phone apps, and meditation ditched its mystical baggage to become mindfulness. Suddenly, these practices were embraced by everyone from Google employees to elementary school kids. And here's what's really wild. Both movements basically told traditional religious authority to take a hike and encouraged people to figure out their own spiritual path. That created what we now call the spiritual but not religious crowd. Millions of Americans who want meaning and transcendence but aren't interested in sitting in pews every Sunday. They're mixing and matching Buddhism, Christianity, therapy techniques, and crystal healing like they're building a spiritual playlist, often guided by Instagram influencers and YouTube channels that deliver ancient wisdom in bite-sized, shareable content. The influence is everywhere once you start looking. Prosperity gospel megachurches are basically new thought with bigger budgets and social media teams. Wellness culture grabbed energy healing concepts and ran with them across TikTok and wellness YouTube channels. Meditation apps brought Eastern practices to your phone, while spiritual influencers build massive followings teaching everything from manifestation to chakra alignment.
Oh, your chakras. Yeah.
He says his chakras are jammed.
Contemporary worship services sound more like concerts than traditional church services, often designed to go viral on social platforms. What began as a countercultural rebellion became the blueprint for how Americans approach spirituality: personal, customizable, and increasingly digital. Those pivotal decades didn't just tweak religion, they completely rewired how an entire generation thinks about meaning, purpose, and connecting with something bigger than themselves.
Our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, so...
The seeds planted back then are still growing, proving that spiritual movements don't really die. They just get a makeover and keep going. Chapter 8. The Screen Saints. How Christian Media Shaped a Generation. The Passion of the Christ was a total game changer when it hit theaters in 2004. Mel Gibson had to finance the entire movie himself because Hollywood wouldn't back it. And when they also refused to handle the marketing, he went straight to the churches to promote it. The strategy worked beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Church groups started buying out entire screenings, and the film became a massive box office surprise. He proved that Christian audiences weren't just faithful with their church donations, they were an untapped gold mine Hollywood had been ignoring. This mainstream success didn't come out of nowhere, though. It was built on decades of underground Christian films that have been quietly influencing how Americans understood their faith. The real beginning was way back in 1972, though, with A Thief in the Night, a rapture thriller that left an entire generation of evangelical kids checking their beds at night to make sure their families hadn't disappeared. These weren't fancy productions, just films shown in church basements on whatever projector they could find. But they delivered more genuine emotion than a lot of Hollywood productions. They built a common language of fear, hope, and end times anticipation that shaped how evangelicals talked about faith for decades. Jump to today and you've got The Chosen, a crowd-funded Jesus series that's actually legitimately good. We're talking about a show that raised over $40 million from fans who were hungry for quality Christian content. This was the most successful crowd-funded media project ever and proved that Christian entertainment could be both faithful and actually binge-worthy. Creator Dallas Jenkins crafted a show where Jesus laughs, the disciples have complex relationships, and the storylines don't resolve in neat 30-minute packages. The show doesn't just tell Bible stories, it creates fully realized characters dealing with real human struggles. It's what happens when Christian media stops trying to have all the answers and starts asking better questions about faith, community, and what it actually means to follow Jesus. The cultural impact has been massive. These movies and shows created a common vocabulary for American Christians. Everyone knows VeggieTales songs, can quote The Prince of Egypt, and has strong opinions about The Shack. They shaped how Christians think about everything from end times to marriage counseling. War Room convinced thousands that prayer closets were the secret weapon for family drama, while God's Not Dead gave college students talking points for philosophy class debates. It's amazing watching this industry evolve from cheesy evangelistic tools to genuinely compelling storytelling about faith's messy realities. We went from simple Sunday school answers to wrestling with what following Jesus actually looks like when life gets complicated.
It's complicated.
Life is complicated.
And these were more than just movies. They rewired how an entire generation thought about God and their place in the world. The spiritual revolution of the 70s and 80s created the landscape we're still navigating, with Christian media serving as both reflection and guide for the journey. This era hits close to home for me. Imagine two little girls, my sister and me, wandering into a local church and having one of those life-changing born-again moments you only read about. No kidding. It was like someone flipped a switch. That experience gave me an incredible sense of peace and inner strength that's carried me through everything life has thrown my way since. I'm deeply thankful for this revolution that didn't just transform me, but millions of others who found purpose and direction in their lives. Now it's your turn. What's your story? Which of these movements hit closest to home for you? How did the spiritual shakeup play out in your family or community? Did it bring people together or create some awkward holiday conversations? I'm curious about the real stories, the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of how these movements actually change people's lives. And just so you know, I read all my comments, so hit me up. So I'd really appreciate it if you spill the tea in the comments below, hit like if this brought back some memories, and subscribe for more cultural deep dives and retro revelations. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me, Retrospective family. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and stay wonderfully curious about the forces that made us who we are today.